Is that where your office comes in to help? And what role do you play?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, part of it, I mean, that's part of my vision is, to take a look, especially, let's just take the capacity issue, for example. I don't think if you went into maybe a high school today and asked students what kind of careers they were looking at, I would bet that not one would say I'd like to work in municipal government. I'd like to work in town government. And yet, those are good jobs.
Sure.
And they're not just jobs, they're careers. Mm-hmm. You mentioned planning, IT, the issues of cybersecurity. Those affect rural communities and rural small towns as much as they do the large cities. So there are a lot of opportunities. So one of the things that I'm actually working on now is having those conversations with my high schools, with my superintendents, with the Voc schools, with the community colleges. Is there some sort of pipeline that can be created so that we can get students interested in municipal government and to get into those pipelines?
Are the jobs there though?
Absolutely, absolutely they are. I mean, if you look, like everywhere else, you'll see openings, you'll see position openings. Now, in a smaller community, it may be more difficult because maybe it's only a part-time position, which of course isn't always very appealing to folks. If you've got young families, that may not be something you can do to take a part-time position. But maybe if it's part-time in Leicester and part-time in Spencer, but where you can cobble together and bringing in some of those regional kind of feelings and having maybe one planner for 2 or 3 communities. And they're already doing that. In some communities, they're already pooling their resources to hire maybe one person that will help out in those communities. But yeah, absolutely the jobs are there. And like I said, they're good paying jobs. And we need firefighters, we need police officers, we need folks working in our public safety and in our highway departments.
So creating more of an interest in those jobs, and so you said it's a capacity issue, right? So is it the same issue that other industries are dealing with? Like is that town hall closed on Fridays because they don't have people to staff it and they want people to staff it, or does it come down to local budgets?
It's a little of both.
Okay.
It's absolutely a little of both because obviously there's an economic piece to that as well. If the community only has X amount in their town budget to spend on services, they find ways to cut, and unfortunately, that is one of the ways, cutting back on hours.
We have a lot of topics, and
sure.
I know these guys want to jump in, but I do want to at the outset. We're already a few minutes in here. The governor declared an emergency this week on the housing crisis, but specifically migrant shelter crisis. Right. Gateway cities tend to be the area that we talk about this the most. Is there a solution in rural communities in Massachusetts? Is there space? Are there options there to help alleviate both the housing crisis and particularly migrants flocking to Massachusetts?
Sure, and some of the smaller communities are already involved in that and working with the local housing. Just to give an example, Oxford in the town of Leicester right now is working on sheltering folks that are homeless at this point. And of course, people, we talk about the migrant issue, and obviously that's a major issue. But even before some of the increase in the migrants coming into Massachusetts, there were a lot of people that are homeless. A lot of folks are just one paycheck away from not being able to afford their rent, not being able to afford their home mortgage. And so it's not not completely unusual to see people that are homeless for those kind of reasons and need help, need some transitional housing. And so, yes, I think that there is a way for all of us to look at what we may have in our own communities, what may be open for housing stock. But, that's a conversation that's been going on for some time, and there's things that we can't fix on the state level. As immigration issues have to be fixed on the federal issue. And my hat's off to the governor and lieutenant governor for realizing, hey, look at, as a state, there's things that we can't do alone, that we need our federal partners. And, if that's the push that the federal government needs to get from not just Massachusetts, but from other states to say, hey, we need to have an answer on the federal level, we need help.
Do you feel like there are projects that are kind of ready to go that need the state's help in rural communities that, could help alleviate these issues?
Sure. So coming into this position, I've been in just 2 months and a couple of days at this point, and it's kind of interesting that you asked that, because I think, when I was in the legislature, we would work on funding for programs, but sometimes didn't always see all the work that goes in to making sure that money gets filtered down the way it should and through grants. And so I'm starting to see that side of it. And so the state does a very good job, especially we have a one-stop application for folks so that they can apply, and it's a whole range of different grants that communities can apply for to help them. And so, yes, we're seeing that. Yesterday I had an opportunity to be down in Freetown, Mass., where we were announcing some of the municipal broadband funding that came out. And the town of Freetown, which is a rural community, received a $350,000 grant to put all of their municipal buildings under one broadband, and also working on a regional basis with the regional school district that they're part of. So absolutely there is some funding that's available for towns, and I want to hopefully be a conduit, try to help them find some of that funding for them.
You touched on the fact that
Sure.
you've only been in the role for a few months. Do you feel like it is difficult because the role didn't exist before, or kind of is it an exciting challenge to start in the role?
It's absolutely an exciting challenge. You're right. It's a little different because they're really not a set blueprint to follow. However, I'm under the Economic Development Secretariat. Everybody has been fantastic. They have been so helpful to kind of bridge, because it's different. It's different from being in the legislature. I'd been in for over 21 years and making that transition. So it's been great. And I'm sorry, what was the rest of your question on that?
Just like if it's been difficult because there wasn't any.
Well, yeah, right. I mean, I guess, when there isn't a blueprint, but on the other side of it, when you get to, when you have that tabula rasa as it is, and you can write on that blank page yourself, it's kind of a nice thing. So, yes.
What are your priorities right now as you're developing this role?
Absolutely. So initially, because there are 181 rural communities, I had, during my time as a rep and a senator, I probably dealt with maybe 50 of those communities. So I have a lot to learn in some of these newer areas. So what I've been doing is, picking up the phone, sending emails to the town administrators, setting up meetings. As I did yesterday, I was down in Freetown, I was in Rochester, and have been out west quite a bit because of the flooding, obviously, that had happened, and trying to be supportive to the administration and to MDOT, Department of Ag Resources, and the work that they were doing out there. So right now it's a lot of reaching out to the communities and trying to find out from them individually really what their needs are. Just to give an example, down in Freetown yesterday, the Southeast Rail is finally expanding after 20 plus years, or maybe even longer than that. And one of the issues that came up in that community is that they said, hey, for the first time, we're going to have commuter trains, maybe 13 a day coming through our community. And that may raise, and they have like 11 grade crossings in that community. So they're trying to plan now, what can we do as a town? What is this how is this going to affect our local economy? Is this going to affect, God forbid, if there were to be an accident? They have a small fire and police department. They rely on a lot of call volunteer firefighters. If there was ever an accident that happened on the rail, will they have enough people to respond? So it was those kind of things that came up yesterday. So very different, very specific to that community. And so you may say, well, how the heck can rural director help with something like that? I think part of it is to be aware that there's an issue. And if there's ways that I can plug them in with some of, making sure that MEMA obviously is aware that if something were to happen, they would need some regional response really quickly. So those kind of things.
And are you finding that different communities have the same needs, or that it's more specific, like with the railroad?
With some very general. Housing, jobs, childcare is pretty universal. Infrastructure, the age of the town buildings. Almost every community that I've talked with, either has a fire station that needs to be rebuilt, or a police station, or highway, or even the town hall that they're working out of. Because we're an older state, right? We have older infrastructure, and in a lot of those communities, especially some of the more rural communities, it's all Title V. It's all septic and their own wells. Well, that does not lend itself to large development, right? So unless you have municipal water supply or a way to tap into somebody else's municipal water supply, it's really going to narrow your opportunities for some of those larger developments that they may be looking at. So those are the kind of issues that are definitely very specific to some communities more than others, but as a whole, those are some of the issues that I hear over and over again.
Do you find that those communities want those developments? Or?
Well, that's another good point, and that's part of my job right now, or at least how I see it, because in some communities, maybe the best development is no development, right? And they look at themselves more. But if you're going to do that, they obviously need to be able to sustain themselves somehow. And one thing that I have found in everyone that I've talked to, they're not putting a hand out. They're saying, look, we know we have challenges in our communities. We want to be part of the solution. We may need just some help to get us to that next step. And so hopefully that's where I come in, and I can be part of that stepping stone for them.
So you mentioned
Yes.
flooding earlier.
Yes.
I know that you were at the Hatfield press conference on Saturday.
Yes.
Flooding.
Yes.
How can the state better support farmers and keep kind of farming viable in the state, especially given kind of everything that's been happening for the last flood?
Well, and again, I'm very happy that as soon as the flooding had started, as soon as the governor and lieutenant governor were on the ground. They were there meeting with the farmers, and as you mentioned, and we have a very aggressive, if you will, Department of Agricultural Resources is doing a great job. Commissioner Randall making sure that there are ways to get money into these communities. And so the governor, the lieutenant governor, working public-private partnerships. As you know, we have a resiliency fund. There's roughly 110 farms, over 3,000 acres that have been destroyed, and we're up to about a $15 million plus of an economic hit to those, and that's going to continue to grow. The funds that we've been able to get, working with our legislative partners, the $20 million that's coming out of a supplemental budget to help. So there are a lot of things that are happening right now. And the other part is, looking ahead. The governor put in a climate chief to make sure that we have, and because these aren't going to stop. Just had to turn on the TV today and see what's going on in Maui. I mean, it's terrible. And the type of things that are happening in Massachusetts, happening throughout the United States and happening worldwide are not going away. So I do think that Massachusetts is going to be well positioned to start to deal better, looking ahead, and that's part of it. It's planning for the future. There are a lot of things that Massachusetts has done to support farmers. We have a dairy tax credit, which is not every state has that. And that's keeping the dairies alive in Massachusetts. There's not too many folks that will go into a business and say, hey, I'm going to spend $1 to make 97 cents. And that's basically what happens in the dairy industry. But if we don't have our dairy farmers, we don't have open space, we don't have a reliable system in place for our own milk production. And we need that. And so there are things that Massachusetts has done and will continue to do to support farmers, and especially young farmers coming up. We want to make sure, because just as is happening in other businesses, our farmers are aging as well. And sometimes that next generation is not there, or they've seen how hard their parents have worked. Because you've probably heard that saying, nothing runs like a deer. Well, nobody works like a farmer. It's 24/7. 365. And, it's not easy to get people that want to get into that. So I think the more that we can do as a state to support young farmers who want to come in, that we need to do that.
Is there something specific in your position currently that you're hoping to achieve, whether that's communicating with farmers and rural communities?
Sure. Yeah. So again, because part of my role is to work across the different secretariats and to work closely as I can with Commissioner Randall. In addition to that, I also serve, we have a 21st Century Farming Commission that is in place. And when I was in the legislature, I was the Senate chair of that. Obviously, I had to give that up when I came into this role, but fortunately, I still serve on that. And we are just starting, when I say we, the members of the commission, the Senate chair is Senator Joe Comerford, and the House chair is the Speaker Pro Tem, Kate Hogan. And so those hearings will start next month in September. And again, to try to find ways to make sure that we're doing what we need to for farmers. And that commission, ironically, was formed before any of the problems we saw. So we were already planning, realizing that we need to do more for resiliency.
As a company with offices in Springfield, Worcester, and Boston, we have always had a very strong interest in a certain project, EastWest Rail.
Yes, absolutely. Our West East Rail, like we like to say, Noah.
Yes. I'm in the middle of the state, so I can go either way. So, with that not being included in the funding in the budget, do you have concerns about that? And I know we've written about this a lot, but just how vital is that to not just those big gateway communities across the state, but to the rural communities that are along that route?
It's absolutely vital, and I expect that we will see some funding coming later on. The smaller communities absolutely would rely on it. In addition to that, we need to have a station, right? I'll be on Tuesday. I have to remember what day it was. I think on the 21st, 22nd, I'll be in Chester. And Chester wants me to take a look at their rail area and what they have proposed for a station.
And that's something the town would like.
Correct, absolutely. And the town of Palmer, the town of 7 railroads, right? And, that they have a station basically there already. It would need to be expanded, but it had been a railroad station. And it's interesting, and you know this, Noah, from your history on it. If this were if we were having this talk 50 years ago, there were about 20 trains a day that ran from Springfield to Boston in the 1960s. And passenger trains.
I've said that before. I live in the town of Clinton, which is a 14,000 small town. Yeah. We have a train station defunct downtown that you used to be able to get to and take a train to Boston, Fitchburg, Worcester, wherever. So, and there are so many towns that have those old stations that represent transportation of the last century. And
we're doing this, right? We're filming today. I was able to come here to do that. I probably could have stayed home and done this, right? Because we have the technology for it. And so, the idea that people can live in the smaller communities now, live in the western part, and still be able to either commute or telecommute to Boston, however it may be, that's appealing. And it would be good for especially for the smaller communities that are really wanting to get their population bases back up. So there's no question. And in addition to that, everything that it can spur from that. If you have a station in a town, well, people have to get there, and then they're probably going to go out to eat, and they'll probably do some shopping. And so it just lends itself to so much more economic activity that can benefit an area.
Many of those towns have kind of their classic American downtown that we saw decimated in the 70s and 80s as malls went in and the local Woolworths closed up and stuff. I'm sure a number of the communities that you're thinking of have those, are looking at revitalization. Some of them have seen it. Some of them still kind of struggle with it. What's the recipe for success, and what do those towns need from the state or just to make it work?
Yeah, well, you mentioned, Clinton. And Clinton has done an incredible job in the downtown area. And, I think you look at that model or even in Hudson, what they have done, Great Barrington. And when you look at those communities, what they've done is that they've made their downtown very appealing. Make sure that they're walkable. And the state, through Mass Office of Business Development, through the various the one-stop grants that come out for complete streets, is trying to do that. That the smaller towns can get in on, and I do think that is a real key, because if you have a vibrant downtown, that just walking up here, I heard music playing, and something so simple as that. I don't know. There may not have been anything else going on, but it gives the sense of there's something happening, there's vitality. And so there are definitely things that smaller communities and we can do as a state to try to make the facades look better, to help the existing businesses, because it's not necessarily always about new businesses, right? There's a lot going on in our smaller communities now, home-based businesses, the small storefronts that are there. Let's help them improve what it may look like, make it more walkable for people. The outside seating areas people love. They've done that in Clinton. And so there are definitely things that can be done to make our downtown areas more walkable, more livable, and people want to come. It's kind of like that whole, you build it, they'll come sort of thing. So I'm excited about it, and I do look forward to working with some more of the communities who want to see that kind of revitalization in their downtown, because we have a lot of state programs that will support that within the Executive Office of Economic Development, and we'd love to see more small towns take advantage of those.
Well, Leominster isn't a rural community. Right. They are seeing the closure or potential closure of the birthing center there, and that will impact the surrounding rural communities. I was wondering, in your role, are you looking at making sure rural communities have access to healthcare?
So on Tuesday, Monday, I am meeting with folks from the rural health policy folks on Monday to talk about that specific issue. Not necessarily about Leominster Hospital. I did just read too where the state has come out and said that that's going to be a necessary service. So that'll be interesting how that will impact. But there is no question that within the smaller communities, mainly because it's difficult to get to places, and that was one of the issues with Leominster if they were to close down on the maternity, and there's nowhere else for people to go. It's too difficult. I have towns that don't even have sidewalks, so never mind having a bus that goes through to have any form of public transportation. So yes, what was the other half of that question? I started getting off the track.
So what are you looking to work to make sure healthcare is accessible?
So one of my conversations on Monday is going to be, where are the gaps really? What can we do as a state to maybe fill those gaps in those smaller communities? We've tried to do things legislatively and through the administration for people who want to get into the healthcare fields to make things a little bit easier for them, to allow different types of credentialing to come in when we're looking at things. We did that recently through a veterans bill that was passed about a year or so ago to make sure that if let's say you have somebody in the military that's coming in from another state, and if they were credentialed in that state for nursing, that we'd be able to carry that over. So we do have to look at some of those things too, because that's part of the issue as well. If we don't, you could set up a clinic, but if you don't have anybody that's going to be there to work in that clinic, that's a real problem. And we know we need more people in the healthcare realm, and we need people who are willing to work to be in rural areas. So absolutely, and so I'm looking forward to having that conversation on Monday so that I can learn more in depth what is being done, and so I get a better handle on the gap. So I'll have a better answer for you after I meet on Monday. But obviously there's gaps in the system, or we wouldn't have a special office just for that, right? Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you about this digital divide concept, and there's a lot of communities that haven't had access to broadband internet. I'm just curious, what's the status of that? Are there still communities that don't have?
So we're in a really good place in Massachusetts right now. Most communities do. They're not at maybe 100%. I'll give you an example. In the town of Templeton, there's literally 4 homes that aren't hooked up. 4.
Templeton, is that?
Templeton, yeah. And so there's $147 million coming into the state, and this is federal money that's coming in, and hopefully that money will be used going to be looking on some of those equity issues and seeing where those gaps are. We know that giving, for instance, in some of the housing authorities, that there may be some low-income folks that are living in some of the housing that don't realize they can have access, and so we need to do a better job to get that word out and try to get folks hooked up. So I think you're going to see, I don't know if you'll ever get to 100%, because there are some people that may live in some of these communities, they may be 4 miles away, and to run, unless it's fiber, and that's not available everywhere, and to run 4 miles of a cable,
Well, if you're that far out, you're probably trying to get away from here.
That's a good point. But we hear that a lot from folks that they'll say, "Oh, I want to move out to the country to get to the country," but then when they get here, then they want everything that the cities have. So, but a good question. But I think you're going to see a lot more happening. The state has been very aggressive. The governor and lieutenant governor, the Mass Broadband Institute has been really very focused and working with the small towns individually. And as I mentioned yesterday, although that was municipal broadband, those were 32 communities that are going to be helped from the grants that came out. And I think you're going to see more of that. And mainly because, cybersecurity is such a big issue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Are there issues that rural communities are facing that aren't getting the media attention that you think they should?
Well, some of the stuff that I guess isn't really sexy is, some of the water and sewer issues. You don't really hear too much about it, but those are big issues. Although you're hearing a little bit more in some of the communities that are facing some of the PFAS issues. But I think sometimes when people when they talk about economic development, they think, just put a building there. But if you don't have the water and sewer that's able to go with that to handle a development, that's a real problem. And then what happens is that when you start looking at some of that infrastructure, the pipes are 200 years old. So they become very costly projects very, very quickly. And I don't think that the media, I don't think we hear enough about that or what can be done to try to help those communities. I think people totally forget about that.
I wanted to ask, kind of related to the flooding issue that's
Yes.
happened. I live in Western Mass, so I totally understand rural community.
Yeah,
And I'm from Warwick, Mass, which is
Okay.
a population of literally 800 people.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that in my town especially, there has been a lot of road damage from the flooding, and I wanted to know kind of what's the hope there? Is there going to be grant funding for road damage repair like they did a few years ago, or?
So a couple of things. Right now, there are grants called STRAP grants for small towns. Warwick would probably be obviously eligible for that. They'd be eligible for some of the rural grants. As an administration, the Haley Driscoll administration is working with the towns as part of the flooding to try to figure out what other kind of damage has been done in the communities. Because as you mentioned, Warwick had damage. I didn't realize if they had that much. I know that I heard from some other communities like Chesterfield and Conway that had a lot of flooding within their downtown areas. And the other issue that comes up in a lot of the small towns, I'm not sure if it's the case in Warwick, but there's a lot of dirt roads. And that traditionally has been a problem, not to be able to get the funding because they're not tarred, they're not asphalt. And so actually one of the things that the administration is looking at too is there a way to maybe come up with something for the folks that have these dirt roads, because they're going to continue to wash out, right? So I do think that you're going to see something on that. There isn't something specific right now that I can point to, but I can tell you that communities have a lot of concern specifically about some of the dirt roads. And I do see that as part of my job to kind of elevate that conversation and see if we can find some ways to do that. In addition to that are the culverts. Yeah. Because in a lot of the small communities, they may not have bridges, but they have culverts, and they have a lot of them. And during these kind of big water, if they've been clogged up before and haven't been cleaned out, and then you add this flooding situation to it. So part of, I am working on that now with some of my regional planning commissions to to see about going out and trying to get some surveys to know how many culverts are in the communities and the status of them. The state does that for dams, but we haven't done that for the culverts right now. And that it's a big issue, and it's a costly issue for towns because they're using their highway folks to go out there and to clean them up. And I forgot which town I was speaking with. It may have been Chesterfield. I was trying to get an idea how often. Basically, they have a highway person out almost every day of the week, spending hours a day cleaning out culverts. That's costly, and that means that person isn't doing something else if they're just cleaning out faulty culverts.
And there's an environmental issue too with outdated culverts.
Absolutely.
Which
Absolutely.
I know there's the ecological restoration.
Right, and that tends, the Ecological Restoration Division had tended to be the area where you saw most of the monies being funneled through to help with doing the culvert replacements. And part of it was because, as you just mentioned, and rightly so, that many of them are in conservation sensitive areas. And so it really adds to what can be done with those culverts. So a bigger issue, Western Mass people get it, but other people in like Boston, if it's not talking about culverts, they're like, so what? So what? A culvert, big deal. But they're major issues. Yeah.
How are you hoping to reach people living in these communities, like to make your presence, your position known to them?
Yeah, so part of it is pretty basic, trying to, getting something up on the website. But my office basically is my car. So I'm hoping they're going to see me around. I'll be going out to the communities. I am going to try to start doing some sort of regional office hours. But my first step was really reaching out to the various town administrators in the communities, get a handle on what some of their priorities are, and try to work from there.
So I had a question
Sure.
specifically about people who want to buy their first homes.
Yeah.
And I spoke to somebody from the Valley Community Development. They're a nonprofit based in Western Mass, Northampton, East Hampton, that area. And they're all about helping people get affordable homes and apartments. And when I was asking about the challenges
Yep.
that exist, one thing that was brought up is that there's a lot of old housing stock, and that developers currently aren't really interested in building more modest Cape Cod style homes and ranch style homes. And I was just curious what you thought about that. Is that something you're seeing?
Yeah, and I have heard that as well. Right, for some of the smaller communities, it's very difficult to, a developer wants to come in and build maybe 50 home development or larger. They're not looking to do the single. So that absolutely is an issue. Part of it too, I think, working with the towns, taking a look at what their current zoning laws are, what they do provide for, what they would allow. You talked about the old housing stock. If it's an older home that maybe could be broken up into 2 apartments, 3 apartments, 4 apartments. Is that something that the town allows with their zoning? Maybe they don't, maybe they can. So I think that those are the kind of issues. But then keep in mind too, you get back, you also have to look at the septic and water capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
So if that home was built for basically 4 people, and that's the size of what they have for their septic, if it's going to now have 8 people or 10 people, then you've got the extra cost and can handle it. So again, not the really sexy stuff to talk about septic systems, but that's the reality, and that's the reality of rural communities and smaller towns specifically.
Well, it's also the character of the community too,
Sure.
right? Because that's got to be a challenge. Most people who move out, to a rural area aren't thinking, "Gee, I hope, a 50 unit complex opens up next door to my house." But at the same time, we are in a housing crisis. We do need more housing stock, and sort of how do you find the way to balance that community by community, and have development and progress that everybody can live next to.
So on my side of things, of course, we have a new housing secretary, a good friend of Ed Augustus, who's in that role, and I know that they're working hard on many of those issues. What I see on the rural side of it is to take a look at, again, it's what the community wants, right? And in many of the towns that I've talked to already, the one big concern is the elderly population. They tend to have, as we do all across Massachusetts, people are getting older, right? I'm 60 years old. And I'm kind of in that group that everybody's my age or older, right? That there's not many younger people. And we have to find ways for people to be able to age in place. And that's one of the real difficulties that we find in the smaller towns as well. That people want to stay, but they're being priced out in many cases. And as you get older, you need more things. You need rural health. You need access to things that you may not have thought about when you were younger. And so I think that that's all part of it when we're looking at rural communities and the housing and who you want to attract and who you want to keep there, and then what you need to provide for those people. You know, we know younger folks when they go into a community, they want what they have in downtown Clinton. They want to have a brewery. They want to have a coffee shop. They want to have those things. That may not be the same as someone as they get older. Maybe they would much rather make sure that there's a doctor's office or a clinic down the street, more so than the brewery.
You mentioned Hudson and
Yes.
revitalization. We also did a reporter road trip there to kind of talk about the mill buildings. And mill buildings, I mean, even in East Hampton, they're being reused. They're kind of throughout the state, you know, in rural communities, also small towns. How can we kind of better facilitate their reuse, and how could that kind of better fit into their economic revitalization as a town?
Yeah, and the towns that have been able to do the mill revitalization they're really cool. Like you mentioned over in Hudson. So a few things. The Central Mass Regional Planning Commission, and you're probably familiar with Janet over at CMRPC. They formed a Milltown caucus. They actually have. So even though it's kind of focused on a CMRPC, they're bringing in folks from around the state to talk about where they've had good luck in those mill buildings. Couple things in the mill buildings. When you go into some of the communities, they tend to be on water, right? Because the old mills were using hydro generation. And so they tend to be in some really neat spots. And, you know, Hudson has done a good job because they've been able to revitalize and bring in some of the walking trails and access to the river. Because, you know, seeing water and being on the river is a really neat thing. So the mills themselves, where they are situated, have a lot going for them, but there are a lot of money to bring back. There's a town administrator in Montague, Steve Ellis, that's involved in some of the mills, and he had said to me, he said, you know, we either fix them or nix them. And you have to agree with that, because if you don't fix them, the cost for not fixing, when you were mentioning about some of the ecological and some of the environmental stuff that happens, think about a mill that's on a river, and that starts to collapse. And of course, the mills, you know, who knows whatever they've been used for, what may still be in there and leaching into the water. And we obviously don't want that. And so it makes sense for the state to want to be invested in, and I'm glad that this administration has looked at ways to revitalize these mills, to bring back, to put through the Office of Business Development, to try, and the public-private partnership. Because, you know, the state can't do it on their own. We need to work with our private partners that want to come in. And another part of that is the historical tax credits through Secretary Galvin's office and the work that has been done, because they're pretty historical buildings and they're pretty neat. And so, you know, working across the different levels of government and working with our legislative partners and absolutely the public-private partnerships are needed, but we need to fix those buildings, because if we don't, they fall into disrepair pretty quickly. I was up in, just to bring up Templeton again, I was there a couple of weeks ago that they're doing over an old school, much the same, because we have a lot of old school buildings. That school has only been sitting for 4 years vacant. You would have thought it had been sitting for 20 years, because it does not take much time at all. Once you get a vacant building, you know, the air, the water, the stuff plus, unfortunately, the people breaking in and the things that can happen with old buildings become a public safety issue, causing problems. So there's 101 reasons why we should try to get these mills back. And when you look at communities who have done a good job with it, look at Lowell for cities, right? The city of Worcester, what they're doing with the housing here. And then you look at Hudson and look at some of these other places, Mass Mocha, you look up and, they've done great things with mill buildings.
Are you paying attention at all to the race to fill your former seat, and are you worried that it could switch parties with your absence?
Well, listen, that's going to be up to the voters. I have my personal thoughts, which I will keep personal on that. But I hope that the people come out and vote in October and November, and I'm looking forward to seeing who will be in that seat. But we'll leave it at that.
It's fair.
Okay.
And thank you so much for
Yes.
joining us.
No, thank
Once again, for those watching, I'm Noah Bombard, Senior Managing Editor for MassLive, and we've been talking with our still fairly new
Yes,
Director of
yes.
Rural Affairs, Ann Gobi. And thanks again for joining us.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Ann.
your time. So.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.